Marcus Chen had always wanted to work in the national parks. He spent his childhood summers hiking with his grandfather through the Appalachians, dreaming of the day he would wear the ranger uniform and protect the wilderness he loved so much. So when the job posting appeared on an obscure government employment website late one October evening, he applied immediately without thinking twice. The listing was strange. He had to admit that much. It described a ranger position at a place called Ashwood National Park, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus had hiked through dozens of parks in that region and prided himself on knowing them all. But he had never heard of Ashwood. When he searched for it online, nothing came up. No official Park Service website, no hiking blogs, no reviews, not even a mention on Wikipedia. It was as if the place did not exist at all. Despite the oddness, Marcus sent in his application along with his resume and references. Within 24 hours, he received a response. The email was brief and formal, congratulating him on being selected for an interview and providing coordinates rather than an address. The interview would take place in person at the park headquarters. Marcus plugged the coordinates into his GPS and was surprised to find they led to a remote area several hours north of Seattle, deep in the Cascade Range, where few roads ventured. He set out early on a gray morning in November, driving his old pickup truck along increasingly narrow highways until he turned onto a logging road that did not appear on his GPS map. The road wound through dense forest, the kind where the trees grew so thick overhead that daylight barely penetrated. After nearly an hour of rattling over potholes and exposed roots, Marcus came upon a wooden gate stretched across the road. A small metal sign hung from the gate, rusted and barely legible. It read Ashwood National Park, authorized personnel only. Marcus got out of his truck and approached the gate. There was a call box mounted on a post beside it, the kind you might find at a gated community. He pressed the button and waited. Static crackled through the speaker. Then a voice, flat and emotionless, asked him to state his business. Marcus explained he was there for a job interview. The voice told him to proceed, and the gate slowly creaked open. He drove through, and in his rearview mirror, he watched the gate close behind him with a heavy metallic clang. The road continued for another 3 miles before opening into a small clearing. In the center sat a log cabin structure that looked like it had been built decades ago. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and a few vehicles were parked out front, all of them weather-beaten and covered in mud. Inside, the building was dimly lit and smelled of wood smoke and old paper. A woman in her 50s sat behind a desk, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a ranger uniform that looked faded, as if it had been washed 1,000 times. She introduced herself as Supervisor Brennan and gestured for Marcus to sit. The interview was nothing like Marcus expected. Brennan did not ask about his qualifications or experience. Instead, she slid a manila folder across the desk and told him to read it carefully. Inside were several pages of typewritten rules. They were not the usual park regulations about campfires and littering. These rules were different, unsettling in their specificity. Rule 1 stated that rangers must never enter the forest after dark unless responding to an emergency, and even then, only in pairs. Rule 2 said that if a ranger encountered someone on the trails who did not cast a shadow, they were to avoid eye contact and return to headquarters immediately. Rule 3 warned against following the sound of crying children, no matter how desperate the cries seemed. Marcus read through all 23 rules, his stomach tightening with each one. Some were bizarre, like the rule forbidding rangers from acknowledging elk that walked on their hind legs. Others were ominous, such as the instruction to report any sightings of people wearing outdated clothing, especially if they appeared near the lake at dawn. When Marcus finished reading, he looked up at Brennan and asked if this was some kind of test or joke. Her expression remained stony. She told him these rules existed for a reason, that Ashwood was not like other parks. She said the forest had its own nature, its own inhabitants, and that rangers who ignored the rules did not last long. Some of them did not come back at all. Marcus wanted to laugh, to dismiss the whole thing as an elaborate prank, but something in Brennan's eyes stopped him. She was deadly serious. She asked Marcus if he was still interested in the position. He hesitated, his rational mind screaming at him to leave, but another part of him, the part that craved adventure and mystery, was intrigued. He thought about the student loans he was drowning in, the cramped apartment he could barely afford, and the dead-end retail job he had been working for the past 2 years. He needed this. Against his better judgment, Marcus nodded and said yes. Brennan handed him a contract to sign. The pay was surprisingly generous, far more than any entry-level ranger position he had seen. There was a clause stating that employees were required to live on site in provided housing, and that communication with the outside world was limited to once per week via a designated satellite phone. Marcus signed the contract, and just like that, he became a ranger at Ashwood National Park. Marcus moved into his assigned cabin 2 days later. It was a small, rustic structure located about a mile from headquarters, nestled among towering pines. The cabin had a wood stove, a narrow bed, a table, and not much else. There was no electricity, only kerosene lanterns and candles. A hand pump outside provided water from a well. It was primitive, but Marcus did not mind. He had always enjoyed the simplicity of living close to nature. His first week consisted mostly of orientation and training. Brennan and the other rangers, a quiet man named Cormac and a younger woman named Ellison, showed him the trails, the boundaries, and the various patrol routes. The park itself was stunning. Old-growth forest stretched for miles, interrupted occasionally by meadows filled with wildflowers and streams that ran cold and clear. But there was an undercurrent of wrongness to the place, a feeling Marcus could not quite shake. The forest was too quiet. Birds rarely sang, and he saw almost no wildlife aside from the occasional deer. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of boots on fallen leaves. Ellison seemed friendly enough, though she rarely smiled. One evening, as they patched a section of trail together, Marcus asked her how long she had been working at Ashwood. She said 3 years, which surprised him. She did not look much older than 25. He asked her about the rules, if she had ever encountered anything strange. Ellison stopped working and looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. She told him that everyone who stays at Ashwood long enough sees something. She said the forest does not like to be ignored, and it has ways of making itself known. Then she picked up her tools and walked away without another word. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. It was on his 10th day at Ashwood that Marcus experienced his first incident. He was on a solo patrol along the Northern Trail, a route that wound through particularly dense forest and skirted the edge of a ravine. The trail was narrow and overgrown in places, and Marcus had to push aside branches and step carefully over exposed roots. He was about 3 miles from headquarters when he heard it. A child crying. The sound was faint at first, almost lost beneath the whisper of wind through the trees, but it grew louder as he walked. It was coming from somewhere off the trail, deeper in the woods. Every instinct Marcus had told him to investigate, to help. But then he remembered Rule 3. Do not follow the sound of crying children. His hand tightened on the radio, clipped to his belt. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the sobs, high-pitched and filled with terror. It sounded so real, so desperate. Marcus forced himself to keep walking, to ignore it. The crying followed him for nearly half a mile before it finally faded away. When he returned to headquarters, he reported the incident to Brennan. She nodded as if this was perfectly normal and made a note in a logbook. She told him he did the right thing by not investigating. Marcus wanted to ask what would have happened if he had followed the sound, but something told him he did not want to know the answer. As the weeks passed, Marcus fell into a routine. Patrols during the day, maintenance work in the afternoons, and evenings spent in his cabin reading by lantern light. The isolation was harder than he expected. The once weekly phone calls to his family felt stilted and strange, and he found himself forgetting what day of the week it was. Time moved differently in Ashwood, slow and heavy like the fog that rolled through the valleys each morning. He saw Cormac and Ellison regularly, but they were not talkative. They did their jobs with a quiet efficiency and kept to themselves. Marcus tried to strike up conversations, but they always deflected or gave short, vague answers. It was as if they were afraid to say too much. One night, Marcus woke to the sound of footsteps on his porch. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth. He lay in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear. The footsteps continued for several minutes, then stopped abruptly. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and crept to the window. He pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. The porch was empty. There was nothing there, but when he opened the door the next morning, he found muddy footprints leading up to his door and then stopping. They did not lead away. It was as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply vanished. Marcus measured the prints with his hand. They were large, far larger than any human foot, and the shape was wrong. The toes were too long, the arch too pronounced. He remembered Rule 17. If you find tracks that do not belong to any known animal, do not attempt to follow them. Report them immediately and avoid the area. Marcus took a photo with his old film camera and brought it to Brennan. She studied the image for a long time before locking it in a filing cabinet. She told Marcus to stay inside his cabin after dark for the next few nights. She did not explain why. Winter arrived suddenly at Ashwood. Snow began to fall in early December, blanketing the forest in white. The park received no visitors during the winter months, which meant the rangers spent most of their time maintaining equipment, clearing trails, and monitoring the forest for signs of disturbance. The cold was brutal, the kind that seeped into your bones and never quite left. Marcus chopped wood for his stove daily and wore layers of wool even indoors. One afternoon, while on patrol near the eastern boundary, Marcus came across something that made his blood run cold. A tent, partially collapsed and covered in snow, sat in a small clearing just off the trail. It was old, the fabric torn and weathered, but it had clearly been there for some time. Marcus approached cautiously and called out. No response. He unzipped the tent and looked inside. It was empty except for a sleeping bag and a backpack. He opened the backpack and found a wallet. Inside was a driver's license belonging to a man named David Torres. The license had expired 6 years ago. Marcus radioed headquarters and waited. Cormac arrived 20 minutes later, his face grim. He looked at the tent and the backpack and shook his head. He told Marcus this was the 4th time they had found Tor's camp. Every few years, the tent reappears in a different part of the forest, always with the same belongings inside. They have never found Tor's himself. Cormac said some people who go missing in Ashwood do not stay gone. They come back in pieces, in fragments, like echoes. That night, Marcus could not sleep. He kept thinking about the tent, about David Torres, about the idea of someone being trapped in this forest for years, maybe forever. He thought about the rules and what they were really protecting him from. Around midnight, he heard a tapping at his window. Slow, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass. Marcus sat up in bed and stared at the window. The curtain was drawn, but he could see a shadow on the other side, backlit by moonlight. The shadow was tall and thin, too thin to be human. The tapping continued, patient and insistent. Marcus remembered Rule 8. If something knocks on your window at night, do not look. Do not respond. Pretend you are asleep. He lay back down and pulled the blanket over his head, squeezing his eyes shut. The tapping went on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, it stopped. Marcus did not move until dawn. In January, a storm rolled through Ashwood, bringing with it snow and winds that howled through the trees like tortured animals. The Rangers were confined to headquarters for 3 days, waiting for the storm to pass. Marcus spent the time playing cards with Ellison and reading old incident reports he found in a storage room. The reports dated back decades, and they painted a disturbing picture. Disappearances were common at Ashwood, far more common than at any other park. Hikers, campers, even rangers themselves had vanished without a trace. But what unsettled Marcus most were the reports of sightings. People had reported seeing figures in the woods, figures that did not move like humans. Some described creatures that walked on all fours but had human faces. Others talked about a woman in a white dress who appeared near the lake at dawn, always facing away, never speaking. One report, written by a ranger in the early 90s, described an encounter with a group of children playing in a meadow. The ranger had approached them, thinking they were lost. But when he got closer, he realized they had no faces, just smooth skin where their features should have been. The ranger had run back to headquarters and quit the next day. When the storm finally passed, Marcus volunteered for a patrol to check for damage. He was paired with Cormac, who led them along the southern trail. The forest was transformed by the snow, beautiful but alien. They walked in silence for over an hour before Cormac spoke. He told Marcus that he had been working at Ashwood for 12 years, longer than anyone else currently on staff. He said most rangers do not last more than a year or two. They either quit or they disappear. Marcus asked why Cormac stayed. Cormac stopped walking and turned to look at him. He said the forest gets inside you after a while. You start to feel it, to understand it, and leaving becomes impossible. He said Ashwood is not just a place. It is alive in a way that most people cannot comprehend. It has rules, yes, but it also has a purpose. Cormac would not elaborate further, and Marcus did not press him. That night, Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his cabin. Sleep felt like a distant memory. He thought about Cormac's words, about the forest being alive. He thought about all the strange things he had witnessed since arriving at Ashwood, and he realized he was no longer afraid. He was fascinated. There was something here, something vast and incomprehensible, and he wanted to understand it. But understanding, he suspected, came at a price. The next few weeks were uneventful by Ashwood standards. Marcus continued his patrols, followed the rules, and kept his head down, but he started paying closer attention to the forest, to to the patterns and rhythms that most people would overlook. He noticed that certain areas of the park felt different, heavier, as if the air itself was thicker. He noticed that animals avoided these areas entirely, and even the trees seemed to grow at odd angles, their branches twisting away from some unseen center. One of these areas was near the lake, a still body of water surrounded by reeds and ancient oaks. The lake was beautiful in a haunting way, its surface like black glass, even on sunny days. Marcus had been warned to avoid the lake at dawn, per Rule 14, but he found himself drawn to it. One morning, he woke before sunrise and hiked to the lake. He told himself he just wanted to see it, to understand why it was off limits. He arrived just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The lake was shrouded in mist, and the air was bitterly cold. Marcus stood at the edge of the water and waited. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, as the sun began to rise, he saw her, a woman in a white dress, standing at the far end of the lake. She was facing away from him, her long, dark hair hanging loose down her back. Marcus felt his breath catch. She was exactly as the reports had described. He knew he should leave, that he was breaking one of the most important rules, but he could not move. The woman began to turn slowly, as if she knew he was there. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to run, but his legs would not obey. The woman turned halfway, her profile visible now, and Marcus saw that her face was pale, almost luminous. Then she stopped and turned back toward the water. A moment later, she simply faded away, dissolving into the mist like she had never been there at all. Marcus stumbled back from the lake and ran. He did not stop until he reached his cabin, slamming the door behind him and locking it. His hands were shaking. He had seen her. He had broken the rule, and he had seen her. But nothing had happened to him. He was fine. Or was he? Over the next few days, Marcus noticed changes. Small things at first. He would forget why he had walked into a room. He would lose track of time, looking up to find that hours had passed when it felt like only minutes. He started having dreams, vivid and disturbing, of walking through the forest at night, following a light that always stayed just out of reach. In the dreams, he could hear voices calling his name, and he felt an overwhelming urge to follow them. He would wake up exhausted, his boots muddy even though he could not remember leaving his cabin. Ellison noticed something was wrong. She pulled him aside one afternoon and asked if he had done something he was not supposed to. Marcus hesitated, then told her about going to the lake at dawn. Her face went pale. She told him he was lucky to still be himself. She said the woman at the lake does not just appear, she marks people. Those who see her start to change, to lose pieces of themselves, until there is nothing left but a shell. She said there was only one way to break the mark. Marcus had to go back to the lake at dawn and face her again, this time without fear. If he could do that, If he could look her in the eye and not run, the mark would be lifted. But if he failed, he would become like the others, the ones who wander the forest at night, calling out to anyone who will listen. Marcus did not want to believe her, but he could not deny what was happening to him. He was losing himself piece by piece. So he made a decision. 3 days later, he woke before dawn and returned to the lake. The mist was thicker this time, rolling across the water in dense waves. Marcus stood at the edge and waited. The woman appeared as before, standing at the far end of the lake with her back to him. Marcus forced himself to stay calm, to breathe. The woman began to turn, and this time, Marcus did not look away. He watched as she turned fully toward him, her face coming into view. She was beautiful, but her beauty was wrong, too perfect, too still. Her eyes were black, empty voids that seemed to pull at him. Marcus felt the urge to run, to scream, but he held his ground. He stared into those eyes and refused to move. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the woman smiled, a slow, sad smile, and she nodded once. She turned back toward the water and faded away. Marcus felt something shift inside him, like a weight being lifted. The fog in his mind cleared, and he could think clearly again. He had done it. He had faced her and survived. Marcus walked back to his cabin, exhausted but relieved. He did not tell anyone what had happened, not even Ellison. Some things were better kept to himself. Spring came to Ashwood slowly, the snow melting to reveal muddy trails and patches of green. With the warmer weather came the return of visitors, though they were few and far between. Ashwood was not advertised, and those who found it usually did so by accident or through word of mouth. Marcus's duties expanded to include greeting visitors, checking permits, and making sure they stayed on the designated trails. Most visitors were ordinary hikers looking for solitude, but occasionally, someone would arrive who seemed different. They would ask strange questions or seem too interested in the restricted areas. Brennan instructed the rangers to keep a close eye on these individuals and report anything unusual. One afternoon in late April, a man arrived at headquarters. He was in his 40s, with graying hair and a nervous demeanor. He told Brennan he was looking for his brother, who had gone missing in the area 5 years ago. He had a photo, worn and faded, showing a younger man with a wide smile. Brennan looked at the photo and shook her head. She said they had no record of anyone by that name. The man insisted, saying his brother had told him about Ashwood, that he had been planning to hike here before he disappeared. Brennan's expression did not change. She told the man there was nothing she could do and suggested he contact the local authorities. The man left, but Marcus could see the desperation in his eyes. That night, Marcus could not stop thinking about the man and his missing brother. He wondered how many people had come to Ashwood looking for loved ones, only to leave with no answers. He thought about the reports he had read, the disappearances that were never solved, the families that were never given closure. It made him angry, but it also made him sad. Ashwood took people, and it did not give them back. Summer brought longer days and warmer temperatures, though the forest remained cool beneath its canopy. Marcus had been at Ashwood for nearly 8 months now, and he had changed. He was leaner, harder, more attuned to the rhythms of the forest. He no longer questioned the rules. He followed them instinctively, understanding that they were the only thing keeping him alive. He had seen too much to doubt them. One evening, while patrolling near the western boundary, Marcus encountered a hiker who seemed lost. The man was in his 30s, carrying a large backpack and wearing expensive gear. He asked Marcus for directions back to the main trail. Marcus pointed him in the right direction and watched as the man walked away. Then Marcus noticed something. The man did not cast a shadow. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground, but where the man walked, there was nothing. Marcus felt a chill run through him. Rule 2. If you encounter someone who does not cast a shadow, avoid eye contact and return to headquarters immediately. Marcus turned and walked quickly back toward headquarters, fighting the urge to look over his shoulder. He could hear footsteps behind him, matching his pace. The hiker was following him. Marcus walked faster, his hand on the radio. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then they stopped. Marcus risked a glance back. The trail was empty. The hiker was gone. Marcus radioed headquarters and reported the incident. Brennan told him to come in immediately and not to stop for anything. When he arrived, she looked more shaken than he had ever seen her. She said the shadowless ones were rare, but when they appeared, it usually meant something bad was coming. She did not elaborate, and Marcus did not ask. 2 days later, Cormac disappeared. He had gone out on a routine patrol in the morning and never returned. Brennan organized a search, and Marcus and Ellison spent the next 3 days combing the forest. They found his radio, smashed on the ground near the ravine. They found his hat, caught in a bush a mile away. But they did not find Cormac. On the 3rd day, Brennan called off the search. She said they had done everything they could. Marcus could see the pain in her eyes, the guilt. She had lost rangers before, but it never got easier. That night, Marcus sat in his cabin and wondered if he would be next. How long could someone survive at Ashwood? How many rules could you follow before you slipped up and made a mistake? Ellison left a week after Cormac disappeared. She came to Marcus's cabin one evening and told him she could not do it anymore. She said she had stayed too long, seen too much, and if she did not leave now, she never would. Marcus tried to convince her to stay, but he understood. Ashwood was not a place you could stay forever. It took pieces of you, little by little, until there was nothing left. Ellison packed her things and drove away the next morning. Marcus watched her truck disappear down the road, and he felt utterly alone. Brennan hired 2 new rangers to replace Cormac and Ellison. They were young and eager, fresh out of forestry school. Marcus tried to warn them, to prepare them for what Ashwood was really like, but they did not believe him. They thought he was hazing them, telling scary stories to spook the rookies. Marcus gave up trying to explain. They would learn soon enough. Within a month, one of the new rangers quit after encountering something in the forest he refused to talk about. The other lasted 2 months before he disappeared on a night patrol. They found his body 3 weeks later, deep in the restricted zone. The official report said he had fallen and hit his head, but Marcus knew better. The body had been placed there, arranged carefully, as if it were a message. Fall came again, and Marcus realized he had been at Ashwood for over a year. He was one of the longest serving rangers now, aside from Brennan. The forest felt different to him now, familiar in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. He knew its moods, its patterns, the places where the air grew cold and the silence became oppressive. He knew which trails were safe and which ones were not. He had learned to listen to the forest, to sense when something was wrong, and something was wrong now. Marcus could feel it, a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation. The forest was waiting for something. One night in late October, Marcus was woken by a sound he had never heard before, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It vibrated through the walls of his cabin, through the ground beneath his feet. He got out of bed and looked outside. The forest was glowing. A faint, greenish light emanated from the trees, pulsing in time with the hum. Marcus grabbed his coat and flashlight and stepped outside. The light was brighter now, and he could see figures moving through the trees, dozens of them, maybe more, walking slowly toward the center of the park. Marcus knew he should stay inside, that this was something he was not meant to see, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. He followed the figures, keeping his distance, moving silently through the underbrush. The figures led him to a clearing he had never seen before, a place that should not exist according to the maps. In the center of the clearing was a massive stone, ancient and covered in moss. The figures, men and women dressed in clothing from different eras, stood in a circle around the stone. They were chanting, their voices blending with the hum that filled the air. Marcus hid behind a tree and watched. The light grew brighter, and the hum grew louder, until Marcus thought his head would split open. Then, all at once, it stopped. The light faded, the figures vanished, and the forest was silent again. Marcus stood there for a long time, trying to process what he had seen. Then, he heard a voice behind him. It was Brennan. She told him he should not have come here, that this place was forbidden for a reason. She said the clearing was where the forest renewed itself, where it called back those it had taken. The people Marcus had seen were not alive, not in any real sense. They were echoes, memories, fragments of those who had been lost to Ashwood. Once a year, on this night, they returned to the clearing to pay their respects, to honor the forest that held them. Brennan said the forest was not evil, but But it was not kind either. It simply existed, following rules older than humanity. And those who worked at Ashwood, who stayed despite the danger, were part of that cycle now. Marcus asked if that meant he could never leave. Brennan did not answer. She just turned and walked back toward headquarters, leaving Marcus alone in the dark. Marcus stood in the clearing for a while longer, staring at the stone. He thought about David Torres, about Cormac, about all the others who had been taken by Ashwood. He thought about the woman at the lake, the shadowless hiker, the crying children. He thought about the rules and what they really meant. They were not just guidelines for survival. They were a contract, an agreement between the rangers and the forest. Follow the rules, and the forest would tolerate your presence. Break them, and you would become part of it. Marcus returned to his cabin as dawn broke over the mountains. He was exhausted, but he could not sleep. He sat at his small table and stared out the window at the forest. It looked peaceful in the early morning light, serene and beautiful. But Marcus knew the truth. Ashwood was a place caught between worlds, a place where the boundaries between reality and something else were thin. It was a place of rules and rituals, of echoes and shadows. And it was a place that did not let go easily. Over the next few weeks, Marcus continued his work as a ranger. He patrolled the trails, maintained the equipment, and followed the rules. But he also started keeping a journal, writing down everything he had seen and experienced. He did not know if anyone would ever read it, but it felt important to document the truth about Ashwood. If he disappeared one day, maybe someone would find his journal and understand what had happened. Winter returned, bringing with it snow and cold and long, dark nights. Marcus spent his evenings by the fire in his cabin, reading and writing. He saw less of Brennan and the other rangers. Everyone kept to themselves during the winter, hunkering down and waiting for spring. But Marcus did not mind the solitude. He had grown used to it. One night, as he sat by the fire, Marcus heard a knock at his door. Not the tapping on the window he had experienced before, but an actual knock, firm and deliberate. Marcus hesitated. Rule 19 said never to open the door after dark, unless you know who is on the other side. He called out, asking who was there. A voice answered, calm and familiar. It was Cormac. Marcus froze. Cormac had been missing for months. He was dead, or worse. Marcus knew he should not open the door, but the voice sounded so real, so genuine. He walked to the door and pressed his ear against it. The voice spoke again, asking to be let in, saying he was cold and tired. Marcus's hand went to the latch, but then he stopped. He remembered the reports he had read, the stories of rangers who had opened their doors to familiar voices, only to find something else waiting on the other side. Marcus stepped back from the door and said nothing. The knocking continued for a few more minutes, then stopped. The voice called out once more, pleading, desperate. Then silence. Marcus did not sleep that night. The next morning, Marcus found tracks in the snow leading up to his door. They were human-shaped, but the stride was too long, the depth too shallow. Whatever had knocked on his door had not been Cormac or anything human. Marcus reported the incident to Brennan, and she made a note in her logbook. She told him he had done the right thing. Marcus asked what would have happened if he had opened the door. Brennan looked at him with tired eyes and said he would have become one of them, another echo wandering the forest. Spring came again, and with it, a sense of renewal. The snow melted, the streams swelled, and the forest came alive with the sounds of birds and insects. Marcus had been at Ashwood for nearly 2 years now. He was no longer the same person who had arrived on that gray November morning. He was harder, wiser, and more attuned to the strange rhythms of the forest. He had learned to navigate the dangers, to respect the rules, and to accept that some questions would never have answers. He had also learned that Ashwood was not just a place. It was a test, a trial, a proving ground. Those who survived did so not because they were strong or smart, but because they understood their place in the order of things. One afternoon in May, Marcus was patrolling the northern trail when he came across a young woman sitting on a fallen log. She was in her 20s, with short blonde hair and a backpack at her feet. She looked up as Marcus approached and smiled. She said she was lost and asked if he could help her find her way back to the main trail. Marcus studied her carefully. Her smile was warm, her demeanor friendly, but something felt off. He glanced down at the ground. The woman cast a shadow, so that was good. But then he noticed her shoes. They were old-fashioned, the kind people wore decades ago, and they were immaculate, not a speck of dirt on them despite the muddy trail. Marcus remembered Rule 12. If you encounter someone wearing clothing from another era, do not engage with them. Report their location and leave immediately. Marcus told the woman he would radio for help and asked her to wait there. She nodded, still smiling. Marcus backed away slowly, keeping his eyes on her. When he was out of sight, he radioed headquarters and reported the sighting. Brennan told him to return immediately and not to go back to that area. Marcus did as he was told, but he could not shake the image of the woman sitting on the log, smiling that strange, empty smile. That evening, Brennan called a meeting. She gathered the few remaining rangers and told them the sightings were increasing. The forest was becoming more active, more restless. She said they needed to be extra vigilant, to follow the rules without exception. She also said that anyone who wanted to leave could do so without judgment. No one spoke. Marcus realized they were all in too deep now. They had all seen too much, experienced too much. Leaving was no longer an option. Summer arrived, and with it came a heat wave that turned the forest into a sweltering, oppressive place. The air was thick and heavy, and even the shade offered little relief. Marcus spent his days patrolling and his nights lying awake, too hot to sleep. One evening, As he sat on his porch trying to catch a breeze, he saw lights in the forest, small, flickering lights, like candles or lanterns, moving through the trees. Marcus watched them, mesmerized. They were beautiful, dancing and weaving between the trunks. Then he remembered Rule 6. If you see lights in the forest at night, do not follow them. They will lead you astray. Marcus went inside his cabin and locked the door. He watched through the window as the lights moved closer, circling his cabin. They stayed for over an hour, glowing softly, before finally drifting away. Fall came once more, and Marcus marked his second anniversary at Ashwood. Brennan gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, which was as close to praise as she ever gave. Marcus felt a strange sense of pride. He had survived 2 years in a place where most people did not last 2 months. But he also felt a deep weariness. The constant vigilance, the fear, the isolation, it was all taking its toll. He thought about Ellison, about how she had said Ashwood gets inside you. He understood now what she meant. The forest was part of him, woven into his thoughts and dreams. He could not imagine life outside of it anymore. One October evening, as the sun set and the shadows grew long, Marcus stood at the edge of the clearing where he had seen the stone and the echoes. He thought about everything he had learned, everything he had experienced. Ashwood was a place of mysteries, a place where the normal rules of reality did not apply. It was a place that took and took, demanding sacrifice and obedience. But it was also a place of strange beauty, of moments that transcended the ordinary. Marcus did not know if he would ever leave Ashwood. He did not know if he wanted to. The forest had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others. And in a way, he was okay with that. Marcus turned and walked back toward his cabin, the last light of day fading behind him. The forest was quiet, but it was never truly silent. There were always sounds, whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. Marcus had learned to listen to them, to interpret their meaning. He knew when the forest was calm and when it was restless. He knew when to be cautious and when to simply accept the strangeness. As he reached his cabin and lit a lantern, Marcus thought about the rules. They were not perfect. They did not cover every situation, every possible encounter. But they were a guide, a framework for survival. And as long as he followed them, as long as he respected the forest and its ancient rhythms, he would be okay. At least, that was what he told himself. The night deepened, and Marcus sat by his window, watching the forest. Somewhere out there, the woman in the white dress stood by the lake. Somewhere out there, the shadowless ones walked the trails. Somewhere out there, the crying children called out to anyone who would listen. And Marcus, ranger of Ashwood National Park, guardian of a place that did not appear on any map, sat and watched and waited. Because that was his job now. That was his life. And in the strange, twisted way of Ashwood, it was enough.